You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to episode 45 of the Daily Faceoff Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor alongside Frank Saravalli. Man, we could go through a whole list of 45s, Frank. You got, of course, a good friend of the show, Jody Shelley, number 45, Donald Audette, and
Aaron Asham, Sammy Vatanen. Let's go.
Let's go on it. Yes. So number 45. And once again, we're coming to you live from the woodjerseys.com studios. You'll see Frank's lovely Toronto Maple Leafs. See the real work that's up close. You can see it. You see on my Boston one, you don't necessarily notice it as much because it's a little bit farther away, but they put a lot of work into it. It's very detailed. This thing is great for your fan cave, for your office, your home. You can get it right now at woodjerseys.com. And with draft week coming up, you got free agency. They're adding more teams all the time. So check it out at woodjerseys.com. They should have all 32 teams by the start of the season. And Frank, we are now into, I think it's going to be just the excitement. Of course, we got the expansion draft list that have to come out on Saturday. And, I think this week, having talked to a few GMs over the weekend, there's some teams that would like to get some players signed that are free agents beforehand. And I know people say, well, they just want to wait. Teams don't want to wait because there's no guarantee that guy will sign automatically right after. I know that some did in 2017, but they were more guys who probably weren't going to get claimed. There's a lot of these free agents, Frank, that if Seattle feels they have good conversations with, I could see them doing what Vegas did and claim a free agent like England and then signing them right away.
Yeah, I think it depends on the team and exactly what their expansion draft situation is. Like, I'll give you one guy that popped up over the weekend that I did a little digging on, and that would be Ryan Getzlaf from the Anaheim Ducks. Now, my understanding is that Ryan Getzlaf isn't going anywhere. He's very likely to remain a Duck next season, I think on a 1-year extension. And I just think at this point, the hold off is to get through the other side of the expansion draft so that the Ducks don't have to expose any other players, especially some of their young forwards that they have, guys like Sam Steele, et cetera. I don't know exactly what their list looks like, but if Getzlaf signs now, that's just one more player that they have to expose. So he's in that category, I think, that you gave right off the hop, like probably not going anywhere. And so not a lot of real shock, but I think that's, a good example of a guy.
Yeah, like Alexander Ovechkin. He ain't leaving Washington, so
exactly.
why would they protect him? But there are, like, I know Edmonton would like to get the Larson deal done, and I don't think they're completely out of the possibilities of Tyson Barrie returning either. Depending on the right term and the right price. So we'll see what happens this week leading up to it. It'll be exciting.
But I do think though that the expansion draft coming up has probably held up some trades though. Like, we have our new trade targets list that's now up on dailyfaceoff.com, 25 names deep. We've got 6 new names on there, including Vladimir Tarasenko, Riley Smith from the Vegas Golden Knights. Duncan Keith checks in on the list in the top 10. But I think Keith is another good example. Depending on what you're giving up, you're probably willing to do it, but that's just one more player that you need to protect if you make a move prior to the expansion draft. So those are all things to consider. Like, whatever transaction happens, there's this cumulative trickle down effect that happens throughout the league on all these different boards, where teams are changing formats, whether it's going from 8 skaters and 1 goalie to 7-3-1. There's a lot of, math that goes into sorting all this out with each transaction that happens. So that's something like on these big boards in these front offices that's ongoing throughout the week.
Well, it's, there are some teams that I think if they can sign a guy and they feel it's not going to risk them exposing anyone else, so be it. And the other thing is having some conversations with people like a team like Carolina. Right now, it looks like Brady Shea and Jake Bean could both be exposed. And you could say, well, they could trade one. But if they trade one, unless it's a really good trade, that otherwise now what happens is you risk losing both because you lose one in the trade and then you lose the other one to Seattle. It only really comes down to a team if they've got one guy they really like who's going to be potentially exposed. If there's a team that has lots of room, like Edmonton could add a forward at this point in a trade and not really worry about it. And there's obviously other teams that could do similar. So I think there's gamesmanship, and also, Frank, the GM meetings going on today.
Virtual.
And, lots of things on the docket, the CHL agreement. And I know that this was discussed in March of 2020. And it was hotly contested. And the main point of conversation is allowing 19-year-olds to play in the American League. Now, I'm a big advocate. I've seen lots of good 20-year-olds go to the American League and just get their teeth knocked in at 20. And they were the same player because they lose their confidence. To do it at 19, like, to me, unless you have 3 years of CHL, like you played as a 16, a 17, and an 18-year-old, and you're a first-round pick. That would be my only way. Like, those might be the loopholes. So then if you look at it, like on an average year in the NHL draft, you're talking, 15 to 20 CHL players that are drafted, because obviously there's lots in NCAA and then there's lots in Europe. So you would have those players. So that's it, right? And then you spread that across the whole country, because otherwise you're going to start really hurting these teams and sending 19-year-olds to the American League. And we've seen tons of European 19-year-olds go to the American League, Frank, and not have a lot of success. So I would prefer they didn't do any, but if they did it, that would be my only loophole, is to allow those type of players who played 3 full seasons before they were 19 and be a first-round pick.
I think it's interesting that you use the term hotly contested. Because I think we're talking about such a small collection of players that I think sometimes people get a little carried away. Like, at the most, we're talking about anywhere from like 7 to 12 or 15 players at the very most a year. So it's not a large group of players, but I think there's a creative way, and I've written pretty extensively about this, knowing that the CHL agreement that was extended from last year was just a 1-year deal that would, make this put this up for debate again this year. And I think the big thing moving forward is, like, it doesn't need to be an all or nothing situation. I mean, you mentioned one creative way to do it, must have a certain number of years or seasons accumulated in major junior, plus be a first round pick. Some are saying it could be one player that you designate per organization, maybe it's not a first round pick. And I think the interesting thing to keep in mind is that this was a fascinating case study this year, allowing those players, since major junior in most parts, certainly the OHL never got underway. The Western League didn't start till very late. So there was lots of players that were in that age range that ended up playing AHL hockey this year. And while a lot of them had success, you think of the Jamie Drysdales, the Quentin Byfields, those types of players. The other caveat to keep in mind with that is that the AHL wasn't the normal AHL this year, because all of the the veteran, tougher players to play against were all on taxi squads, the 5-member taxi squads in the NHL, and didn't play in the AHL at all. So, that's sort of the push and pull that exists. But at the same time, the thing is, like, let's say Quentin Byfield, for example, I don't know if he meets the age criteria, but I'm just going to use him as an example. He plays the season in the AHL. Now we enter a new CHL agreement next year. And let's say there isn't a provision for a guy like Quentin Byfield. How do you then send a player who now played a full year of pro hockey back to major junior? So I think these are all difficult conversations to have. I think all of the stakeholders involved have so much respect for major junior and what it means that they want to be sure to not trample on it. But at the same time, I think a lot of these GMs are looking at it like, look, this is a results-oriented business. It's about putting our best organization on the ice and what's best for our players, not so much protecting major junior. So like I said, there's a push and pull here that I think major junior even understands, maybe a losing battle to fight to try and keep all those players in the league that they have in the past.
True to a point, but I think the NHL has to understand, like, still the majority of their players come from that league, and they're not paying anything to develop those players, right? Like, they pay them after the fact. But
that's actually not accurate, because the NHL pays the CHL $13 to $15 million a year to do it.
But out of 60 teams, Frank, like that's 60 teams. That's not a lot of money per team when you think about it.
No, but I'm saying like from the NHL teams, it's a lot of money that they're paying to develop those players.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good deal that they've got going right now. And to like the funny thing is about this whole it's I think one of the biggest misnomers about the NHL is that youth is better, right? It's a salary cap era. How many youngsters were on Tampa Bay's winning teams? How many guys were even in their first or second years when they won the cup? None. Right, like main players, right? Cernak and Sergachev.
Ross Colton was a rookie this year that scored the cup final.
But how many years of pro? Yeah, okay, he scores one goal, Frank. He's a fourth line player.
No, I'm saying like there's not many, but
yeah,
I don't know if the Lightning are the best example because they're not usually like almost every really good team that's at the top of the salary cap has some contributor that's on an entry-level contract.
That's why. Yeah, but maybe the last year of his entry-level deal, right? So it's still not a rushing to the league thing. Like you look at the NHL draft should really be a 19-year-old draft. And then if they did that, then you could have players that would, pardon?
That's a whole different conversation though.
But no, but I think it ties in to it either way because right now, having players drafted at 18, right? There's the odd one, the late birthday at 19. The NHL, we see more and more players who get rushed to the league, who lose their confidence, and it never comes back to the level that you expected them to be. Because if you're a scorer your whole life and suddenly now you're not scoring, and now you're in a man's league, because you're right, Frank, this year's AHL, I talked to a lot of coaches who've coached in that league for a long time, and they said, hey, the league was significantly different. Right now, we can debate if different is better or not, but it was significantly different. And young players, it was hard to get a gauge on it because some teams had 4 or 5 guys who would have been AHL top line players sitting in the taxi squad every night. So now you're against easier competition. How accurate of a reflection was it? Because unless they're going to sign another 2-year deal and try it. Right? What happens is all of a sudden they realize 2 years down the road, geez, we've sent a lot of 19-year-olds to the AHL and it hasn't panned out. And that's a big risk for teams because most of those players are going to be considered the top prospects in every organization.
I think those are all fair points. And one of the guys we actually end up talking with our guest, Kevin Allen, in this episode about is Michael Rasmussen from the Detroit Red Wings. Like he's a guy that was put into the AHL at a pretty early age. He started out actually in the NHL and then had to go back to the AHL. And I think, I've actually talked to Ken Holland about this, the idea of, you take this guy that's done almost everything that he can accomplish in the WHL. And then what's the sense in sending him back to the WHL? He's too big, too strong, too good. He's going to toy with the competition, and there's no, there's something to be said for confidence, but moving forward, is he really progressing? And so do you want to challenge the player and get him to the NHL and begin that right away? Like those are the questions that I think every team, struggles with the answer to.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure that'll be the heavy debate today amongst the 32 now GMs on what their plan is moving forward for the CHL. Other than that, I haven't heard anything that's going to be, necessarily game changing or anything like that. I know that, Tampa Bay wearing the t-shirts, Kucherov and the, 18 mil over the salary cap. Like I'm sure that will be discussed, Frank, but ultimately I don't believe it can be changed, mainly because it's got to be ratified with the Players Association. And the players are going to be like, first of all, this is a shortened season. In a normal year, if a player has surgery in September, most of those surgeries you can recover from and be ready to play before the beginning of April, maybe even March. So you'll play anyway. And that meant there was $18 million more for the Players Association to be spent this year. I don't see any motivation for the PA to want to change this rule.
It also, by the way, if you're doing the math that way, and this is a nerdy point to make, is it increased the amount that the players have to pay back to owners in the escrow formula. So I get what you're saying, but yes, basically you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in the long run. But just a quick point on the t-shirts. Like I get the celebration aspect. I get, Nikita Kucherov. Like, look, we mentioned last pod, no issue with his press conference. Love the entertainment value, the honesty, the liquid courage, all those things. But I think the t-shirt takes it a step too far. And like, look, I've made my point pretty clearly about the Lightning and their cap situation. Your point is well made about this is a one-off year, shortened season, and also the last season ending so late in the bubble that it created a unique environment. But to then flaunt it and have your agent tweeting about your 18 million over the cap shirt, I think it kind of makes a mockery of the situation. Like, the agent tweeting it could very well have been one of the architects or orchestrators of this cap scenario. And then to make a shirt and have everyone wear it and flaunt it, I just think it's not a good look for the rest of the league, which it's obviously a pretty sore subject among other managers with the way that it played out.
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see the other side, and a little bit of controversy sells, right? The NHL doesn't have tons of personality to begin with at times. And so the heel has become
quite a heel turn for Kucherov. Yeah.
Right. And if you're Tampa Bay, you're back-to-back champions, their fans love it. And if the opposing fans hate you anymore, like, there's something to be said about the heel or people just wanting to see you fail, so they follow it. And that might not be good.
But why not just keep for Kucherov, he had another shirt that said #1 bullshit. How about just that shirt? Like, do you
multiple, Frank? You're going to sell them all. Like, I bet you those t-shirts are this is, come on, this is marketing, and this is business, and this is Bud Light. Who, by the way, you can
on Instagram, you would have thought that his agent actually won the Stanley Cup, but that's for later.
See, I like a little color in what is sometimes can be a very prim and proper bland league. So I don't mind it at all. I understand the frustration from other people on this scenario. It seems like it's a one-off, but if you look by the rules of the law, they did not. It's not necessarily
right. I've never argued that it's a rules violation. My argument the entire time was it was a violation of the spirit of the CBA. That's all I've ever said. And
and that's her. This one's more you don't like them basically rubbing it in people's faces that they did it.
Well, yeah. Look, to have it happen, fine. To wear a t-shirt after the fact and flaunt that you were a $98 million team in an $81.5 million league. I've said it before. This is the best example I can give when people say, how big of an advantage is it? You had a Connor McDavid and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the cap extra that no other team had.
Well, hey, welcome back to the mid 90s, early 2000s, Frank, when Detroit and but it's true, right? Like those, it's a reminder that of course there can be a significant advantage. Now, the New York Rangers were the exception back in the 90s and the 2000s. They spent galore and could never win. But Dallas, New Jersey, Detroit, Colorado, it's not a surprise that those teams always
the Flyers
won.
were spending the Flyers cap in 2003-04, like their internal spending was $74 million. We are 17 years later, and they're still barely just above that at 81.5.
Yeah, wow,
amazing.
Yeah, so that you wonder how much more money they're making, considering they must be making some at that point. So that's good. Now, hey, Frank, coming up at dailyfaceoff.com today, you have the recent trade targets, and of course, Tarasenko is right in, and you broke that story way back in the end of June in your article there. But you look at all those names, Frank, and I know you've been doing these lists for many years. Now, maybe my memory is just off because everything is fresh. I don't recall this many, like Jack Eichel, Kuznetsov, Seth Jones, Tarasenko, like legit, really good players, all openly available.
I've said it all along that this is the juiciest offseason in hockey history, and people think that I'm some sort of like hype man. You've got the trade targets list, which is it's like legit 20 names deep. And then you've got maybe the deepest free agent class ever. And I'm not even including guys like Ovechkin on the list. I didn't have Landeskog in my original rankings because I didn't think there was a possibility for him to go anywhere. It's very, very talented this year, and the flat cap has a lot to do with that, and so does the expansion draft. And so I mentioned those two things, free agency and the trade market, without even mentioning, the excitement and intrigue of the expansion draft itself. And kind of the crazy part is that we're now sitting here on July 12th, and it's been very quiet. The buyout window has been open. We haven't had a single buyout to this point. There's been one trade in the month of July, and that was Arvidsson going to LA for a couple of picks. Other than that, it's been kind of quiet. So this is all going to come together. Expansion lists are due in 6 days. The expansion draft is in 9 days. Free agency is in 16 days. Like, this is all going to come together in really short order. So I guess the risk in putting out a trade target story is that it's dated information in 24 or 48 hours.
Yeah, potentially. But, you look at a lot of the names and, you have a guy like Evander Kane, who might have been the Sharks' best forward last year, right? Well, he was the Sharks' best forward.
Yeah.
Wasn't
it was
even
a
close,
career
really.
year for him.
And, you also have Sam Reinhart in your top 10. And you look at the Buffalo Sabres, man, Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart, and you've got a rookie GM. Like, now, hey, a lot of people thought Joe Sakic as a rookie GM, and look at the great moves he's made over the years. He was ultra patient. What's your sense on the Sabres and what they're going to do? Because, even Ristolainen's name is involved there. Like, that's three major changes.
Trade target list as well.
Plus Allmark's a free agent. Like, it's amazing what potential change we could see in Buffalo this offseason in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, look, Reinhart is such a talented player too. Like, I actually struggled where to place him on the list. And, I mentioned in the story that I think if you were to really ask and dig in on the Sabres and Kevin Adams and ask Don Granato about trading Sam Reinhart, that neither one of them would want to. Like, he'd be one of those perfect guys to build around. But I think the environment has been so negative there, so difficult. His comments have been so negative. Add in the fact that, he's a guy that needs a contract, and you're like, okay, like, do we just rip the Band-Aid off here and decide to move on? And I think that's kind of what this offseason is for the Sabres, is ripping the Band-Aid off. They've had, so many difficult and lean years that now it's about sorting out which players actually want to be there. And I think, Ristolainen's another guy, change of scenery. Let's move on here. Let's do something different. Jack Eichel has hit the wall. You've got to make changes and start to build around guys that want to be there. And I've yet to really see any indication from any of those three players that they really want to dig in and continue to be there. So I think that's the big thing moving forward with the Sabres.
Yeah, they're a fascinating team for me to watch. Columbus, similar. You've got Seth Jones, who's obviously a really good defenseman available. Kuznetsov's a unique one for me in Washington because, when we saw the deal they made for Verana and Mantha, with a first and a second, I'm thinking Kuznetsov might be a trade where, Washington, like, they still feel they're in their window to win, right? They're going to re-sign Ovechkin, Frank. So do you see any of your top 10 moving for another player in the top 10?
I hadn't really considered that idea.
And I know those are hard. Like, you got to go back to like Danny Heatley, Marian Hossa trades. Like, it's rare to see, top end players traded for one another, but with so many available, I wonder if this is a year that, teams just, kind of here's one of our really good players. We'll take one of your really good players.
It's funny. And maybe it's just the fact that I'm looking at two Russians at 3 and 4. Like, could
Tarasenko for Kuznetsov?
Yeah, could that work? Could that make sense for St. Louis? Like, you're taking 2 extra years of term, and what you're getting in Washington is 2 fewer years. That makes your cap situation a little bit more manageable. Is Tarasenko really the stylistic player that the Caps need? And also, you're trading a center for a winger. Those are always difficult transactions to make. I'm just totally spitballing. Like, I wonder if, cap wise, it certainly makes sense. And there's not much of a net change at all there. I think that's the only one that really might make sense.
Yeah, because
in the top 10.
Yeah, like I don't see Buffalo. They would love to take Seth Jones for Eichel, but he's only got a year left in his contract, and because of their situation, it'd be pretty difficult to see him re-signing there, right? Like the Jack Eichel trade, if they make it, is going to be for a lot of younger players with term and then draft picks, because Buffalo's in a clear rebuild once they deal Eichel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, maybe Pavel Buchnevich is a guy that you could see going as part of a package from New York to Buffalo in an Eichel deal if that were to happen. Buchnevich is really interesting. Like that guy had an unbelievable season, 48 points in 54 games. I mean, he was really, really good. And another guy that has been really consistent. This was a career year for him. It comes out to a 72-point season in an 82-game campaign, but he needs to be paid. And so it's interesting. Larry Brooks had, I don't know if you are a big Seinfeld fan or not, but Vandelay Industries, I'm an importer exporter. Like it was an awesome reference that he made in his column, but he was saying if the Rangers want to be better, they're going to need to send guys out and also bring in new guys at the same time. And so I think Buchnevich, a guy needing to be paid, at the very bare minimum, he's looking at $5 million in an arbitration award. Plus that also walks him to free agency. He needs a longer term type deal. And I just don't know if the Rangers are the team to give it to him. So that's why he's on the board. And I know that they've been pursuing and engaged in conversations about potentially moving him.
Frank, I consider Seinfeld the greatest sitcom ever made. We could do a whole episode talking about. I
actually had the shirt Vandelay Industries, like with the smokestacks that said importer exporter. It's awesome.
Oh man, to just see George wheeling out of the bathroom, tripping with his pants down around his ankles. Oh, such a great show. Absolutely love it. So no, I could keep talking Seinfeld, but let's switch over and get to our guest today, Kevin Allen, because there's lots going on. The Detroit Red Wings, Steve Yzerman, one of the harder nuts to crack as a GM. What moves are they going to make? He had the Verona deal at the trade deadline. He's got Bertuzzi. They got a boatload of picks in the upcoming draft. I expect Detroit to be a big player.
Our next guest had one of the best jobs in hockey for 34 years, covering the league as a national reporter for USA Today. He was also the former president of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. Glad to share in that same title and really learned so much from Kevin throughout the years. And he's now on to his next adventure covering the league for Detroit Hockey Now, back to his roots as a beat reporter. And the DFO Rundown is pleased to welcome in Kevin Allen. Thanks a lot for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Happy to be on the show with you, Frank. Congratulations on your new gig.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so let's start off here. Tell us what you're up to, why you decided to get back into the rink and cover the Detroit Red Wings.
Well, I think it's fair to say that I didn't adjust to retirement all that well. And that during COVID, I really had the itch to be involved, and I really felt like I still had stories to write and more reporting to do. And, I don't want to do it forever. I'm looking forward to retirement. I have a little place on the lake that I get to quite a lot, but I was ready to do it again. And I was looking for kind of a combination package in order to get it done. And I ended up cutting a deal with Hockey Buzz to write 20 national columns per month, and then I ended up with a even more regular gig with Detroit Hockey Now as a beat writer. And obviously, I had been a beat writer, but usually for 31 teams, and now it's for one, so it's a little bit different. So I'm learning how to juggle both of those responsibilities, but I couldn't give up the national gig. That's why I'm still writing columns for Hockey Buzz, but I do. So far, I've enjoyed, paying a lot of attention to one team, though I had to pick the one that has one of the most difficult general managers to read, and Steve Yzerman, who does a really fine job, but, he doesn't allow a lot of information to leak out of his office.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that when you signed on to cover the Red Wings. I was like, wow, that's a tough assignment. Like you said, he has the ability to make the job interesting, but doesn't give a lot of info. And that's actually why we wanted to have you on, is to get some insight on the wings. To me, they're one of the most intriguing teams of the offseason in the sense that in a lot of ways, Steve Yzerman has a clean palette. He can do with whatever he wants with this team sort of moving forward salary cap wise. And in addition to that, everyone's kind of wondering when exactly he's going to put his stamp on this team to get them heading in that direction that he certainly achieved with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So what do you foresee as you look into your crystal ball for the offseason for Detroit?
Well, first of all, I think he already has kind of put a stamp on it just with regard to, in Detroit where Steve Yzerman can do no wrong. He essentially walks on water. And, I'll give you an example of that. With his coach, Jeff Blashill, there were a lot of fans that wanted Jeff gone just on the basis of the fact that the team was so horrible and they couldn't move beyond the one-loss record. But Steve Yzerman said, there's nothing wrong with the way Jeff Blashill is coaching. I just haven't created the team good enough to win. And I really like what he's doing. And he's very involved with that. Well, he said all that, rehired him. And then, when you read the comments from the fans, it's like, well, if Steve says he's okay, he must be okay. And, there's no other city right now where I think that would have worked. But it does work in Detroit because they have so much trust. But Yzerman has done things like Moritz Seider was not ranked where he drafted him at number 6. He was lower than that. And now Seider is considered to be the best prospect, currently not in the NHL. The Vrana trade, where he got rid of a very inconsistent scorer and brought in another guy who's a little bit younger, who scores at the same level, and then added a first and second round pick. Well, that really played well in Detroit. So, and then the picking last season of Lucas Raymond, who at the start of the year was considered to be a possibility to go number 1 overall, but sort of fell to Detroit at 4. And I think fans are excited about that as well. He's made a couple other small trades that have worked out for him. The Adam Ernie trade looks pretty good right now. Ernie all of a sudden looks like a player. Fabre from St. Louis has stepped in and played on the second line for him. So I think people feel like he's really already made an impact. However, this season, when he's done signing his restricted free agents, he'll have $27 million in cap space. I think we'll see him use some of that, but not all of it, because I don't think he feels it would be worthwhile, because that was the case last season, to go out and try to bid on a older, and when I say older, I mean older by rebuild standards. In other words, he's not looking for a 29 or a 30-year-old. He's looking for guys that are younger than that. So I don't think he'll try to get one of the big time free agents. But he could use it to take a bad contract. Certainly, if somebody was in cap hell like his former team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, he could perhaps make a deal then. He's looking to try to acquire younger either draft picks or prospects.
Kevin, when you look at, mentioned younger picks or prospect, this, and Frank just had it up at dailyfaceoff.com, the trade opportunities, and there's some really good play. I can't remember the last time we had this many elite players up for grabs. You've got Jack Eichel, you have Seth Jones on the blue line, you have Vladimir Tarasenko now, you've got Kuznetsov. Detroit has 11 picks in the first 5 rounds this year. They've got a boatload of picks. They got lots of young prospects. Do you see Yzerman maybe jumping in more in the trade market where you're going to get, as you mentioned, a younger player who's under contract, but also, you don't have to overpay in term. These guys are already signed, so you know what their contract is. Does that seem like a more realistic path for you?
Well, realistic, but not for the players you mentioned. Like, I do think he's looking at trades, but again, he's looking younger. And I know you're going to say Eichel is in the rebuild age bracket, but Eichel would cost him too much if we are to believe that they're looking for 4 assets with first round equivalency. He's not going to give that up. He's not going to. I think he would view that as setting back the rebuild to get 1 player back for 4 players that he values as part of the rebuild. So I don't see him in on Eichel. Same thing with Tarasenko. But I do think he's poking around at like McDermott in Toronto and other where there's younger players who, for whatever reason, teams need to get rid of either for expansion draft reasons or for cap reasons or whatever. Like, for example, if right now it appears, although I think they've probably got it figured out already, Eric Cernak would be vulnerable to go in the expansion draft. If that were the case, I'm sure Steve Yzerman would be all over that in terms of trade to get a younger defenseman that would fit into his. So I think he is being very aggressive because that's his nature. So I think he's looking at all the younger guys who fit the category you just described. For whatever reason, the teams need to move him. But I would be shocked if he went after any of the older players.
Okay. Now I look at the Detroit, and their protection list seems pretty straightforward up front, but it also illustrates the need to improve their blue line. You mentioned young, you've got some young defensemen in the organization, but very rarely, if you want to be competitive, are you winning with a ton of youth on your back end. So where do you see guys that they can help on the back end? Because, you've got they just acquired Verana, and you've got Larkin, Rasmussen. I still think they're pretty high on. Obviously, you've got Bertuzzi, et cetera. But is the back end the obvious void? And if so, how can he fix it this offseason?
Well, I think he's going to do exactly what he did last season, which is, he's going to add stopgap players. That's the only area where I could see him, taking older players, but they won't be, long-term guys or guys that he sees as part of the permanent fix. Now, he is on record as basically saying that it's going to be 3 more years before this team is ready to go. Like, they had a chance last year. Torrey Krug was a Michigan native. The word on the street was he would be willing to come back to Detroit. But Yzerman didn't go after him. And the reason he didn't is because he felt like by the time this team was going to be able to compete, Krug would be 30 years old. And he just didn't feel like that was a good fit. So I think you'll see them. If you remember last year, they went after a guy like John Merrill, then ended up trading him. They went after Stahl. I think there's a chance Stahl will come back. They loved him. He's an older player, but he was very good with the younger players. He competed hard every night. Like, that's the thing that struck Detroit fans, is how hard he competed. So I think there's a chance they would bring him back as a guy to be a mentor and to be, pretty stable influence as well. And then I think they'll look around and try to pick up. I would think that Mike Riley is a guy they're going to be interested in. I think they'll poke after Ryan Murray. These are defensemen that are in the 27 age bracket, and they'll see what their cost is going to be. But there's no doubt they're going to add at least 2 and perhaps 3, depending on who they lose in the expansion draft defenseman.
So, Kevin, Tyler Bertuzzi was a name that just popped up in conversation, and he's actually on our daily face-off trade targets list. And I find that really interesting for a number of reasons. I guess part of it's age. You have to pay him. You mentioned some other guys that are in that 27 age range that, at a certain point with a 3-year window still to go in a rebuild, does it really make sense to pay a guy like Bertuzzi? My question for you, as he's on, seemingly the trade block, is how concerning is the back injury with him? What's the latest in terms of his recovery? It seems like he's going to be at full strength for training camp in September, but that seems to be an injury that has teams concerned given his style of play. Yeah.
And I think, as you said, it's just not so much that the reports have been bad, but just the idea that back injuries for guys who play like he does and bang around a little bit in front of the net is one that, causes concern. I think the Red Wings certainly didn't start out this summer thinking they were going to trade Tyler Bertuzzi, but there has been interest in him. And the only kind of trade that I can see Yzerman making with Bertuzzi, and I wouldn't rule it out, because Yzerman will do anything that gets him, in his mind, to be a better team in 3 years. So if you could offer him a package that would do that, like if you could give him prospects that he thinks can be ready in the 2 to 3 year range, he might do that, because he's going to get a little younger, which is fine with him. And also, if he could get multiple guys instead of just one, they would do that. But he's not going to trade them for draft picks. Like, I see a lot of stuff out there about social media about, we'll offer him a first round pick. That's not going to do it, because he's going to use those picks to try to find a guy like Bertuzzi when he already has them. And Bertuzzi's not old, obviously. He still fits in the rebuild, age bracket. So they're not in any hurry to trade him, but I think they would do it if it was the right, package to be sure.
What are the Red Wings going to do in goal? Obviously, they have Thomas Greiss signed for next year, 1 year left on his deal. He's 35. What's in the pipeline? And that's always such a big question mark when you're looking at a rebuild. Do they have the goalie to build around?
No, they don't. It's worrisome, I think, for the organization. They're looking around. The fan base, I think, would like them to take Jesper Wallstedt, who is the Swedish 18-year-old who jumped in and played in the senior men's league there in Sweden. Has been very impressive. A couple of scouts I've talked to have compared him to Spencer Knight or Askarov, the Predators' fine prospect. And I'm not sure what the Red Wings are going to do there because Yzerman is such a hard read. And that first pick, he always talks about he leaves it to his scouts, and I think that's true. I think he trusts the guys he has there. But I think Steve owns that first pick, and I think that will be his call on whether they take a Wallstedt at number 6. This is a COVID draft, which means teams are less sure about their rankings than they usually are. So maybe this is the time to take a goalie where, because it's always sort of felt that it's harder to project a goalie, but it's hard to project a lot of these guys in this because you haven't seen them as much as you had before. So I think there's discussion of that. Beyond that, they will go out and get a veteran goalie and play now. I think they're for sure going to take multiple goalies in this draft. I don't know what rounds it'll do it. But I think they feel like they've got to get to 2 or 3, and they've got to find one. And if they don't get one, an elite one this draft, they're for sure going to get one next time. They really need to do that because when I mean they have nothing coming, they literally have nothing coming.
How come they didn't trade Jonathan Bernier at the draft? At the trade deadline. Yeah,
it's a good question. First of all, I think there's a chance he'll come back. He could be the veteran goalie, but I don't think either they didn't get what they wanted. The team has played well for the Red Wings, and what that told me is one of two things. Even the offers weren't strong enough, like they were getting 4th and 5th round picks, which Yzerman may have felt that we might as well try to be more competitive, because I think in the first year they were so bad that Yzerman said to himself, I can't allow these younger players to be have to go through this again the second year. So he made it a point to make the team more competitive, and he did that. Those veteran defensemen made that team. That games were always close. They were in games. They felt like there was some progress because they were seeing that. So I think maybe that was it, that he didn't get offers that were strong enough to warrant just throwing them out. So he thought, I might as well keep them and stay fairly competitive.
Kevin, when you look, it's Steve Yzerman, his fingerprints are definitely heavily involved in the back-to-back championships for the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's no question. And they built through the draft. They also built with some really good, like Kucherov in the 2nd round and Point in the 3rd round and, Palat in the 7th round. Killorn was later picked, but Yzerman wasn't there when he was picked. How do you evaluate kind of the scouting staff? Because, I'm not sure it's always on the GM. Actually, I'm pretty confident it's not always on the GM. He doesn't see a lot of these players. The amateur draft, and if you want to be a good team, ultimately, you're going to have to rebuild through the draft. So where do you rank the amateur scouting of the Red Wings right now?
Well, I think it's better than it was because it's new and it's hungry and it's aggressive. I think, it had gotten stale under Ken Holland, and I suppose he bears responsibility for it, but I'm a little kinder to Holland than the fan base, simply because I think, he did a lot of good work for the organization for a lot of years. And at the end, he wasn't used to having a team that was on the decline. And I think he struggled to figure out how to correct that. But I don't think you should erase all that he did, but I don't think there's any question they didn't draft well. Rasmussen, who you said that, they still like him. Yeah, they do like him because he works hard, but, he's going to be a third line guy. And, where he was picked at, the thought was, well, shouldn't we have found a first line guy, or at least a guy that could play in the top six? So that's sort of the, where that the Holland drafts were at. Since Yzerman took over, he's brought in a lot of guys, and he's given them the mandate is we got to find real players and err on the side of the skill package. We want guys who can be dynamic, that maybe, hey, we'll miss on some, but we need to find some home runs. We need to find some Kucherovs. We need to find some guys. So they've done that. If you look at their picks, they've done some things like the New Jersey Devils back in the early 90s were known for guys that maybe at the start of the year looked like they were going to be higher and then faded for whatever reason. The Red Wings have looked hard at those guys. They've looked at guys who have great skill packages but hadn't produced. A good example of that is Wallander, the Swedish defenseman, who is big and skilled and everything, and just didn't do anything his draft year. But they took him with the first pick in the second round, and now he's going to be on the junior team, and he has kind of come along. So I think this amateur scouting that they have, led by now Chris Draper, who Yzerman knows well for having played with him, and he really strong-armed Draper, saying, I really need you to be good at this. So tell me you can be good at it, and we'll be fine. And I think Draper said, yeah, I'll do the job for you. And
Kevin, it's funny going back to Rasmussen. I watched him a ton in the Western. He was dominant in his draft. I understood why they took him high. And like, part of me wonders if he's just a big body that, I didn't love the decision to put him in the AHL at the time that they did. I'm not a big believer in that overall. I'd rather have kids dominate and maintain their confidence. So I don't know if that stifled his development or not, but you mentioned third line player now. What is it about Rasmussen's game that just hasn't translated? Because he had everything. He could score, he could skate, a big body, and we just haven't seen that at the pro level.
Yeah, it really hasn't. He hasn't been able to make it all come together. He's his straight line speed was fine early, but he had trouble getting going. I think he's worked on that. I've been told that Yzerman really does like his work ethic. And I think when they took him, they hoped he might be a Jordan Staal type, a guy that could slide up and down the lines. And maybe he will still be that, but right now he hasn't shown that. But right now they have him penciled in as a number 3 center, and he has worked at all the things. They wanted to be more aggressive. I thought he was more aggressive last season. He has worked certainly on his skating, because there's difference between being a good skater and, as in the CHL, and a good skater at the NHL level. So he's worked at that, but they haven't given up on him. That's for sure. But I think they're starting to project that he's not going to get any higher than where he is now. He will play on the power play, though. They do like him in front of the net.
Interesting. Yeah, Kevin, really appreciate your insight on the Red Wings. I wanted to see if you could regale us with a tale or two from your time covering the NHL at USA Today. If you're listening and you're under 25, to understand the platform that Kevin had, writing in the paper that was delivered to the doorstep of almost every hotel around the league every morning, unprecedented, unmatched circulation across the country. What was it like covering the league for 34 years at USA Today?
Well, I mean, you just encircled really the fun for me was, when I first started out, you need to establish yourself. But, my had built-in establishment, because, as you said, would go and be under the doors, and all the hockey players would read it. And, so many times I'd go up and introduce myself, and the guy would say, "Oh, I know who you are. I read you every day." And we were the paper of record. NHL wasn't covered all that well by all the papers. So there was a running joke that it really didn't happen until it was in USA Today in the early years. This is in the 80s. And even internationally, I went to Japan to cover a game when the Vancouver Canucks went over there, and a security guy called me in the press box and said, "There's people that want to see you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I just thought maybe it was somebody that knew me from the past. And I went down, and there was a line of about 8 or 10 Japanese people who had my books, and all knew me from reading USA Today. And the same was true when I met Russian people. They all knew me because the only information you could get in Europe was often from the USA Today. So it made my life fun, but just because I had such a large platform, I remember Jacques Demers was a little disappointed in the local coverage of the Canadians, and he banned all newspapers in the dressing room except for USA Today, which made me then, of course, the subject of the reporters in Montreal having called to get my reaction for that. So it was a lot of fun times in those early years, and then everything changed when the internet came along, and I say all the time, everybody who covers the league now is a national reporter, because as you know, once on social media, everything's on social media. So it changed, but I enjoyed every minute at USA Today, and I was proud of my career. I was proud to work for USA Today, and I wouldn't trade any of it.
So last one for me, Kevin, and then I don't know if Jason has any more. We could play some rapid fire. If you had a word of advice for someone starting out in this industry, I looked up to you for a long, long time and still rely on you for advice and counsel, what would it be to someone starting out in the industry?
Right all the time. I recently talked to someone who wanted a career in our business, and he was a senior in college. I asked him how much writing he had done that had been online or published, and he said, well, none. And I said, well, you're way behind. By the time I had graduated from college, I had written 1,000 stories, literally 1,000 stories. I had internships, I had worked for my college paper, I was freelancing every chance I get. That's still the most important thing. You need to get out there, you need to write, you need to have a feel for the story, you need to understand that writing has pace. You need to, get a sense for what your style is, what you're going to do. You need to understand, you need to report so you can understand and develop your own ethics of how it's all going to work. It's a complicated business now. There's no doubt, more complicated than when I started. And in order to kind of sift through those complications, you got to do it. You got to do it early, and you got to learn by it. You're going to make mistakes. So you got to get out, and you just got to find it. You can take no for an answer. You can't take no for an answer. You've got to be able to get early in your life to be able to be published.
All right, Kevin, we like to end every interview playing rapid fire, some fun, different questions. The only rule is you have to answer the question. All right, I will. So here we'll start. Kevin, you had one of the biggest breaking stories ever with Mario Lemieux returning to Pittsburgh. How did you get that story?
It's kind of complicated without revealing my source, but I'll tell you what I can. We had a tip, and I checked on with a couple of places, and mostly it was done with league sources and not local sources. And then once I had the league sources figured out, in other words, people in the national scale that had an inkling this was going on, I went to the local and got it that way. And I will say that what I remember the most about it is Mario Lemieux was told that I had it and that it was coming out. And he said, give him 30 minutes, which and that was very big, that thing. They didn't confirm it until 30 minutes after I broke it.
Oh, that's pretty good. Nice.
Yeah,
so he wanted you to have the 30 minutes of the
He did. He did.
Pretty nice. Yeah, obviously, you had earned a pretty good reputation for him.
I knew Mario actually pretty well back then. So,
okay. You were the beat reporter for the Detroit Red Wings for many years. So tell me this: who was a tougher fighter, Kocur or Probert?
Oh, I got to qualify that. I think Probert was the scariest fighter. No. Probert was the most effective fighter and the most well-known, but Kocur was more enthusiastic about it. Probert needed to take a few punches to get into it. He was actually a reluctant fighter. He was a teddy bear, really. Kocur liked it, and he was dangerous. People knew he was dangerous. He could hurt you. So they were a little scared of him. But Probert was such a heavyweight that, once you got into a fight with him and he was into it, you were in serious trouble.
So, Kev, if you're barbecuing, what's on the grill?
Pork chops. I like pork chops and lamb shanks.
And what's your spice of choice on those?
Well, I got several. We would use probably mostly number one would be garlic. We put a lot of garlic in our food.
Okay. And do you have a beverage of choice that you go with your pork chops or lamb?
Yeah, mostly would be a beer to be sure. And I'm a real traditionalist when it comes to beer. I'm a Bud Light guy mostly, but I will drink a Bud regular as well. But I'm an American beer drinker, and my wife is likes the ambers and everything else, IPAs. But I'm more of a traditionalist.
Okay, so you're the Nikita Kucherov of your household right now, big Bud Light.
Yeah, I was quite amused by that, and I really did enjoy that. I was disappointed that he took some heat on that, because as a reporter, that's the personalities we want. You see that so often in the NBA, and when I was at USA Today near the end of my career, when we were really watching the numbers, hockey just can't get anywhere near the NBA because of their personalities.
Yes.
And, in terms of our readership. And if we had more guys like Kucherov, we would do better. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, you just got to have beers before every press conference, clearly.
Well, that's true. That was probably beer inspired. There's no doubt.
So Kev, you're a national guy. You're, beat reporter. You're back doing both again. Over the years, who was the GM that you kind of felt you worked with the best? Who, like, the best quote? Who is the one that just gave you the best?
Yeah, that's easy. It was Brian Burke. There's no doubt. I knew him as an agent. He was one of the first people I met at USA Today. So I had a great relationship with him. And I loved calling to talk to him. And, he always had, good information, very colorful quotes. But one thing I'd say about him that, a lot of people think that, Brian comes up with all of his stuff spontaneously in the ad libs. And, he's probably pretty good at it, but he thinks about everything he says. And remember, every time you read something from him, is that he has already thought it through. And he's saying it for a reason. There's always a message or a method to what he has to say. He never, even though it feels like he's flying off the handle, he's never flying off the handle.
And then on the other end, who was the toughest nut to crack as a GM to get information?
Well, it's one of my favorite GMs. It's David Poile. I say all the time, and I've known David for 40 years, and he's very cooperative with me. He's a real good quote for a national guy because he's always insightful, but he never gives me any scoops. That's just not his nature. He's a very private person, and so the next scoop I get will be the first that I get from him, and I've known him 40 years. Now, he'll talk to me and give me great quotes and explain things, but he's not going to tell me inside information about his team. He just doesn't do that.
And lastly, if the Red Wings are making a splash here in the next few weeks, will it be a free agent or a trade?
It'll be a trade, to be sure. And, if it is, maybe it will be a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi, because I think he'll fetch a lot. Bertuzzi is the kind of player that you look for the postseason, and the Red Wings aren't going to the postseason for a while. So he actually might be better off to go elsewhere. I mean, can imagine, Boston with Bertuzzi or any of the contending teams. Like, he was born to play playoff hockey, and it's a pity that he's not going to be there. So, and I think he could get a lot for him. With Toronto, would it escalate into a multiplayer trade? I think it could.
Kevin, great stuff, man. I've appreciated reading your stuff and talking to you over the years. Thanks for joining us on the Daily Face-Off Rundown.
That was a lot of fun, guys. I appreciate it.
Kevin Allen, what a great career. 34 years, USA Today. And prior to that, I think he's written like 13 or 14 books. He was with JR. He wrote one, of course, on Chelios and Brett Hall and many others. So he was well respected and still is well respected many years in the media world as a great journalist. And what he's doing in Detroit right now is pretty awesome. And I'm kind of intrigued by the Red Wings, Frank. I think the Red Wings are going to be the quiet surprise team. And I know that he feels, he being Steve Yzerman, that they're a few years away, and I can respect that. But at the same time, there might not be a summer where you have this many big name players available. I won't be shocked if Steve Yzerman jumps into that fray and acquires one of those players.
Yeah, I think the problem is he's juggling, though, jumping in to, to make sure you nab a couple of those players, but at the same time recognizing that the rest of the operation may not be up to speed or able to catch up yet. I mean, we asked Kevin about the goaltending. That needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
Their back end needs some help. So all those things considered, then you look at the division and you're like, holy smokes, man, like that is going to be a really, really tough division. That's what the Ottawa Senators are facing as they hire Pierre Maguire. That's what the Buffalo Sabres are facing. That's what the Montreal Canadiens are facing, as Tyler asked on Buy or Sell in episode 44. Like, you've got Boston, Tampa, Florida, all these teams, the Toronto Maple Leafs, that are right there in that division. Good luck trying to crack that. And so I think that's also trying to time that right about when to be competitive. The right time is perhaps the biggest challenge for Steve Yzerman moving forward.
And maybe we will see some moves. Of course, the GM meetings today, once they get together, guys have, there's one, it starts conversations that maybe they weren't expecting. And this will be a fascinating week leading into who gets signed before, who's going to, of course, be exposed on the list come out on Saturday afternoon. So we look forward to that, Frank, and we'll be discussing that on the eve next Friday. Have a great week.
Yeah, and we'll have it all for you on dailyfaceoff.com in between then.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.